What's the most enraging thing a computer illiterate person has said to you when you were just trying to help? Blaming an error on you, when it happens months later and is completely unrelated to any work you did, especially if it's a hardware failure when you fix software problems. Just imagine that with any other technical industry. Have a friend who is an electrician come to your house for free, install an outlet for free, and next year, a light bulb on the other side of your house burns out, so you call him up and say it is probably his fault, and guilt him into replacing it. That stuff doesn't happen. Story 2. On a Monday morning, my boss got an irate phone call from one of the department secretaries. The secretary said that I had been working on a computer the previous Friday, and now her desk lamp didn't work. For the record, the computer and lamp were plugged into different outlets. A thorough investigation was launched, and the likely cause of the lamp outage was shown to be the housekeeper bumping the lamp plug with a vacuum cleaner. The secretary did not feel the need to apologize. No doubt, my repairs to the computer somehow caused the housekeeper to bump the power cord. Gotta love people's rationale sometimes. Story 3. Back in the day, there were monitors that could switch from color to green only, so you could use them as a text-only terminal or a regular monitor. A fairly common complaint was, "My monitor is all green," and it was just a button you press on the side of the monitor to toggle it back. I get a request to fix this one day. I cruise over and press the offending button, and the monitor switches back to color. "How did you do that?" she asked. I proudly showed her the secret button, placed conveniently near the power switch on the side of the machine. In every other instance of this problem at this point, the user would say, "Oh, thanks," and I would walk away, satisfied with another successful ticket closure. This time, however, she asked, "Why is that there?" I explained it's in case the monitor is used in a text-only terminal, plain green letters are easier to read. "I don't understand. I just wanted to know why it happened," she pleaded. I point out that the button is right near the power button, and she probably pressed it accidentally when she turned the monitor on or off. "I didn't press any button. You need to fix it," she exclaimed. I honestly didn't care. Her monitor is colored again, and I just want to get out of here now. I started edging away. "I want to understand what happened so it'll never happen again," she explained. She didn't like that. I got the glare all the way down the hall and a protest from her to my manager. We both made fun of her behind her back for a long time after that. It's okay if you do something that makes the computer act funny and have to ask for help to fix it. You don't need to find a way to blame it on someone or something else. And we're not going to judge you for it unless you act uncooperative about it. Believe me, whatever stupid thing you've done, we've seen more ridiculous things. Story 4. About 10 years ago, I briefly worked at a nonprofit that used Dreamweaver for their massive website. I was hired to help clean up and reorganize the site, which was slow and not well organized. Since the rank and file had been using the WISI-WIG interface for years, the content was filled with all sorts of deprecated and/or incomplete and improper elements like blink. So I would bring individual documents into my favorite text editor, use regular expressions to delete all the HTML, and then reformat the content with well-validated HTML that could easily be dropped back into the templates and work with a new CSS. My boss was a VP, literally moved from a non-technical department to oversee the web development team. She could barely use her computer to surf the web, let alone code anything. She just knew Dreamweaver was her development tool and tried to use buzzwords to justify her micromanagement style. Technical people were not fooled. Non-technical people thought she was brilliant and techie. So she came into my office one day and rather obviously worked her way behind my desk to see what I was doing. If we had done the same, we would have seen her chatting with her friends all day. I ignored her since it was obvious she was checking up on a new girl. With the piles of content I'd plowed my way through, I had nothing to hide and much to be proud of. However, upon seeing the text editor up with content she recognized, she literally shrieked, "This is gobbledygook. It's not Dreamweaver. The entire web is written in Dreamweaver. Everyone knows that. Why did we hire you?" And even though I'd been there less than a month, that was the day I started to look for a new job. Story 5. I've just stopped helping friends altogether because it feels like having the nebulous qualifier "good at computers" entitles any and all acquaintances to treat you like labor or tech support. And that's crazy because you can't do that on any other skill set. If you've got a friend who's got some culinary talent, you never hear someone say something to them like, "Hey dude, I'm really craving a Southwestern omelet with a spicy honey glaze, and I was kind of hoping you could help me out." Huh? Google it. Google what? Oh, Google the recipe. Why would I seek out step-by-step instructions and try to solve my own problems? Sounds like it involves work and reading. Why not, dude? You're so good at cooking. I mean, I'm not going to compensate you in any way, but you're so good at cooking. It'll be fun. Granted, I'm going to eat the entire omelet, so there'll be no tangible benefit for you, but it'll still be fun. Well, no, of course, it doesn't sound like fun to me. I'm not a fool, but I bet it would be fun for you. And also, I'm going to hover over your shoulder the entire time and complain about how long it's taking every 5 minutes or so. On top of that, you'll probably get a call 2 weeks later like, "Hey man, what's up? Oh, I'm fine. I just got done eating a deep-fried pepper stuffed with bacon and sautéed in Tabasco. Anyway, for whatever reason, I feel like I'm going to mess my pants any second, and I'm pretty sure because that omelet you made me 2 weeks ago gave me indigestion. You want to come over and offer me a steak to make it up to me?" Story 6. Here's my favorite story. I fixed my in-laws' computer, removed hundreds of bugs, plus spyware, plus malware, plus fixed thousands of entries in the registry. Even asked them if they wanted me to fix the resolution if they had it at 640 by 480 or something. Well, obviously, first they complained that it made their font small. So I unfixed the resolution and colors. Later on, the dad calls and demands we drive 3 hours each way on a weeknight to fix his computer. The printer isn't working. The home phone is dead. He was in a rage. His wife locked herself in the bedroom. The sister-in-law was crying. We tell him to call the phone company and maybe we can help on the weekend. 2 days later, the technician arrives, unplug the printer's USB cable from the phone jack, and everything starts working perfectly. That man is a genius. Story 7. Working as an intern many years ago in tech support, I was tasked with building my boss's new laptop. Once I was done, I handed it off to him and he was gracious enough to give me his old one to use in return. I got back to my desk, cabled it up, and turned it on. Being in an office where everyone had static IPs and I had configured his new system exactly the same as his old one, I received a Windows 95 pop-up that someone had the IP I was trying to use and I couldn't have it. My boss, meanwhile, got a pop-up that said someone was trying to use his IP address, but it would not be permitted. No big deal. I switched the IP address on my side and dropped by the boss's office to tell him to click OK and just ignore the mistake. 3 days had passed, and I was called into my boss's office. He asks me to take a seat and just stares for what seemed like a full minute. I finally spoke up. "Is something that," I began to ask, but he cut me off. "I know what you've been doing," he said firmly. "Excuse me?" I asked, now trembling. "If you confess, I won't dismiss you," he insisted. "What?" "I know you've been taking my emails." What? I haven't been," I stuttered in disbelief. "You took my address and you've been embezzling my email. You're dismissed for this." I got him to calm down long enough to explain that no, the IP conflict would not permit me to take his email, password required, mail identity and client, etc. Being the clueless intern I was, I figured the technical explanation would suffice and the misunderstanding would be happily resolved and life at the office would continue. My boss stood up, knocked over a mug of pencils, and screamed at the top of his lungs, "You're a liar! I'm an important person and have not gotten an email from the outside world in 3 days because you've been taking them." So I did what I thought made sense and sent him an email from my personal email account that resided outside the office. It showed up in his inbox a minute later. "You tampered with it deliberately. You ensure your emails went through while continuing to intercept all my important messages." That ended up being a really long day. And yes, he just hadn't had anyone send him an email from outside the company in a few days. Story 8. I used to work in a local computer shop and have more stories about computer illiterates than I could ever tell. Even though this post will most certainly get buried in this huge thread, I'll tell 3 stories that randomly came to mind. A person calls in and is really upset about how "this Windows you sold me won't install." Conversation follows. "What seems to be the problem with the installation?" I asked. "Man, I've been trying all day and it won't install. You probably sold me a fake one, didn't you?" He pointed at me. "I can assure you we did no such thing. Please explain the issue you're experiencing and I'll do my best to help." I replied calmly despite his claim. Okay. It tells me to accept some agreement by pressing F8 or something, but nothing happens when I press F8, he said, clearly frustrated. "Do you have a button on your keyboard called F-lock?" I inquire. Let me check. Yeah, I do. What now?" he asked, still irritated. "Press it," I instructed. "Okay, what now?" He continued patiently. "Now press F8. "Are you a wizard?" he exclaimed, unable to contain his amusement. Another story involved a middle-aged woman who called in with a vague problem with her computer. After about 10 minutes of trying to help her over the phone, I still couldn't understand what her issue was because she couldn't explain it clearly. I asked her to bring the computer in so we could take a closer look. About 2 hours later, she arrived at the shop and asked for help unloading her car. I decided to be helpful, even though it wasn't part of my job. When I reached her car, I found it packed with everything connected to her computer. CRT monitor, keyboard, mouse, printer, scanner, speakers, microphone, and more. Before explaining that we only needed the actual computer, I jokingly asked if she forgot to bring her computer chair and table. She took it seriously and asked if she needed to go back and get them. In another case, a caller was irate because the memory he bought from us and installed wasn't showing up. I told him to bring it in so we could inspect it. When he arrived, I opened the case and found the RAM stick just lying at the bottom of the case. True to his word, he had indeed just put it in the computer. Story 9. I work for an insurance company as tech support for company agents and licensed brokers. One day I got a call from an elderly fellow who was trying to update our software, but it wasn't finding any updates. It notifies the users when there should be a new update, which is every 2 weeks for rates and 2 months for any patch releases. He and his wife, who was of a similar age, are the only ones on the phone. So I start the call asking them to go to a website that we have that allows us to remote into their computer. Okay, let me start the internet for you, I said, only to hear the unmistakable AOL dial-up sound in the background. This wasn't going to go well. Our software was only compatible with IE8 and Firefox, and technically, only IE8 was officially supported. Well, long story short, and after almost another half an hour, they finally connected to the internet and I managed to remote in. Software works fine, and I made up some lies about what caused the problem when really, they were just too foolish to connect to the internet when trying to update something. It could have been a 5-minute call if they had just listened to me instead of at every point assuming they knew what was going on. Story 10. I work in an internet cafe and sometimes get the oddest issue. One customer started shouting across the shop that his computer was broken and had frozen. On taking a look, it was working fine, so I asked what he was doing when it froze up. I didn't do anything, I didn't even touch it. Turns out he had been sitting there for 15 minutes just staring at the screen expecting it to just do something, hadn't even touched the mouse or keyboard. Another customer came in to check her email but didn't know her email address and demanded that I tell her what it was. Eventually I found out that she didn't actually have an email address but just wanted to check her mail because it's what people do these days. The funniest one was when a really rude customer came in to print off a document. All of a sudden the printer started printing the same one-page document out over and over again. Upon checking the print queue, there were over 700 copies that had been sent to print. When speaking to the customer, she argued that she had been pressing the print button over and over and nothing had come out while pointing at the underside of the monitor, and we had to pull ourselves together. Under normal circumstances, I would have just canceled the queue printouts, but I fetched a security guard to stop her leaving and then just continued to feed the printer new paper until she had her 700 plus sheets and then charged her for each one 10 cents per page. Story 11. My brother and I were accused of downloading AOL onto my aunt's computer when we were 11 and 9, around the year 2000. My aunt claimed that they had canceled their AOL subscription and switched to Yahoo, but received another bill for AOL and assumed one of us must have reinstalled it. I remember my dad trying to explain that just because they had a Yahoo email and set Yahoo as their homepage didn't mean Yahoo was their ISP, or that they should expect a bill from AOL. Despite this explanation, I'm still not allowed in her computer to this day. A couple of years ago, my cousin, her son, mentioned that she was furious because I'd rickrolled him by linking to the video on YouTube. She thought this caused a bug in the computer and that it needed to be left shut off for a couple of weeks to rest and fix itself. Did she actually believe the computer needed bed rest? Story 12. I had this ridiculous encounter with my dad about his laptop. 200 unread emails? No wonder this thing is so slow, he exclaimed. Dad, those emails aren't stored in the computer, they're text files, and having files in the hard drive only affects performance if the drive is nearly full. I explained. Don't be ridiculous, it's the emails causing the issue. Delete them or I'm taking away your computer, he insisted. It really stung to be called a fool by my dad when he was literally talking out of his body part and was entirely wrong. The best one was when his laptop got a bug. Look, the hard drive is completely full, but it still had like 20 out of 80 gigs left. Delete all of that stuff, he exclaimed. Dad, those are my music and movies. I'm not removing them from my computer, and look, this is one of those bugs that pretends to be malware protection. That's the problem. He proceeded to yank the computer out of my hands, rush into another room, and delete my user account. He then tried to defrag and asked for my help when it wasn't going very fast. I pointed out to him, look, this bug is still in the computer, that's the problem. He ended up buying a new computer which he didn't let me touch because I obviously broke the one I lent to him. He had a bug a few weeks later from surfing movies with no malware protection, and I didn't even bother helping him. Story 13. I know this won't be seen by anyone, but I just wanted to get this off my chest. It was a great day when I finally told my mother that I can't do her IT work anymore, because whatever I do always ends up being broken because of her and her inability to use something other than Internet Explorer. This came after she purchased a prepaid phone that didn't work. I called tech support for her and was on the phone for hours. I called them at least 3 times trying to get the stuff to work when I just told her that it wasn't going to work. She then asks why I won't do it for her because she isn't tech savvy, to which I explained to her that if I help her with tech, it's because I'm doing a favor, and that what she purchases she needs to take responsibility for the maintenance. She was furious after telling her off on the phone, but she seemed calm about it and understood when she got home. I only visit from time to time, but being obliged to do IT work for a family who can't maintain stability is a pain in the neck, and compelling yourself away from the work by asserting yourself is the best way to do it, at least for me. Story 14. A caller contacts the help desk with a problem regarding Microsoft Word. Caller: I opened up Word and it is corrupted. Support agent: could you clarify what you mean by corrupted? Is it just a specific document or is it happening with all documents? Caller: it's happening with all of them. Support agent: understood. To better diagnose the issue, I'll need to remotely access your computer to investigate. Caller: why do you need to remote into my computer? I've already told you what the problem is. You should be able to fix it without needing to see my screen. It seems like you don't know anything about computers. You should be able to resolve this issue now. Support agent: I understand your concern. However, without more detailed information or seeing the problem firsthand, it's challenging to provide any accurate solution. Diagnosing issues remotely allows me to see exactly what's happening and identify any settings or errors that might be causing the problem. If you've made any changes or if there's a specific setting that's been altered, I need to see it to help you effectively. Caller: it's not my fault that your systems are slow. Just resolve the issue. So I remote in and notice that page numbers are being displayed as page. I go into Word options and turn off a setting that displays code. She says, "Oh, it's normal now," and hangs up abruptly. Before I could end the session or act out of frustration, I see that she's running both Solitaire and Hearts in the background. Realizing I previously helped her director and had a good rapport with him, I decided to observe her activity. For the next 3 days, she consistently opened both Word and Hearts, spending almost 4 hours a day playing. I would end the process, but she would immediately restart them. I decided to inform her director via Office Communicator, letting him know about her behavior and that she had been extremely disrespectful during our last interaction. He replies, "I don't like her. Consider it dealt with." About 20 minutes later, I received an apology email from her, apologizing for both the phone call and for using server resources to play games. To this day, whenever I'm frustrated, I randomly end her Citrix session and she never calls back. Just thinking about her still makes me furious. Story 15. Mine is not computer related, it's audio related. I provide tech support for a leading microphone manufacturer in the US, and a recent conversation about a wireless microphone system went like this. Customer: I just purchased 36 of your wireless microphone systems and none of them work. Completely frustrated. Me: alright ma'am, this might sound basic, but let's start by checking a few things. First, can you confirm that your system is plugged into a power outlet? Customer: yes, she exclaimed. Me: alright, now are the transmitter or microphone and receiver on the same frequency? Customer: yes, escalating voice. Me: okay, perfect. What cable are you using to connect the receiver to the amplifier or PA system? Customer: what do you mean cable? This is wireless. Completely condescending. Me: how else would you expect to hear the sound? You would still need to connect this to a PA system. Trying to hold back my laughter now. Customer: no sir, but this is wireless. You obviously don't understand. Still pissed. Me: the only difference between a wired system and a wireless system is that the microphone doesn't have a cable. You'd still need everything else, like a PA system or other speaker or amplifier combination. I couldn't contain my laughter now. Customer: well, that's not what the guy at the music store said. The customer purchased a wireless microphone system, expected sound to radiate from heaven without a system to hear it through. That's still my favorite call to this day. I had other pretty good ones, but that one just sticks with me. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 16. My mom was setting up a website for her church to replace their current pure HTML one. I suggested she use WordPress because I considered it the easiest CMS to configure and use. Templates at the win-wang, what have you. 3 days later, she called me. Hi, I desperately need help with this, she says. Okay, what's the problem? Well, I wanted to make a place to test out all of this stuff before uploading it to our website, so I downloaded the WordPress release and unzipped it to my computer, then ran install PHP. Ah, yeah, see, I figured this would be a problem. See, you probably should just install it on your current website in a subfolder. You'll encounter a bunch of problems trying to run PHP files from your local... She interrupted me. Oh yeah, I read about that. I got Apache installed on my office computer and I'm running a server, but I can't get this installation running. I didn't know what to say. My mom is the most computer illiterate person ever. I have to give her help, daily, on how to use WYSIWYGs, reminders of what div tags are, etc. I then proceeded to walk her through the installation of WordPress on her machine, one of the simplest, easiest, keep clicking next installations, but she somehow installed Apache. Story 17. I have a different kind of tech support story that might interest you. My dad lives in another state, and whenever I'm in town, I make it a point to check over his computers to ensure everything is running smoothly. He usually takes his computers to a local repair shop when something goes wrong, partly because he senses my growing frustration with handling issues over the phone. Recently, his computer suddenly stopped booting. After some troubleshooting, we discovered that the issue was surprisingly related to the keyboard. The computer would boot up perfectly fine if the keyboard was unplugged, and it also worked well with any other keyboard. However, it failed to boot whenever the preferred keyboard was connected. My dad really liked that particular keyboard, so he took the computer to the local shop for repair. The technician at the shop, with more of a traditional in-depth approach than a modern IT specialist, decided he would find and fix the problem at any cost. After the computer was in the shop for over a week, the technician suggested a $200 repair bill. He was confident he had identified a bug related to the firmware but had not yet resolved the issue. Trusting the technician's expertise and not wanting to challenge him, my dad was prepared to pay the fee. However, I decided to call the shop myself to get a clearer picture. When I spoke to the technician, I clarified that we didn't need a deep, expensive fix. We just needed a new keyboard. This experience reinforced how sometimes, even with a deep understanding of computers, focusing on the basics and asking the right questions can prevent unnecessary and costly fixes. Story 18. I swear, my father-in-law was put on this earth so I would have a reply to this thread. I can't imagine why there would be any other reason for him to place a link for MySpace on his desktop and move it manually to the recycle bin because that's how you delete your MySpace account. Then later, when corrected, rage out because we didn't tell him people could still see his profile. Another thing is, he downloaded 4 different malware protection programs that he runs a full scan with each and every time he starts the computer. This led him to find other spyware that reinforced the need to yell at us for not giving him the best programs for catching cyberpunk. Lastly, he protests that his computer of 10 years is too slow because my husband must have done something with the Ethernet and the USB. After years of dealing with his rants, my husband gave up on helping them with their computer concerns. He has just enough knowledge of Windows to feel confident he could open his own computer repair shop, despite his knack for creating more problems than he solves. This is from the man who thinks Russians are attempting unauthorized access to his computer and knows when he's deleted one of their bugs. This man lives on another planet. Story 19. Not really a computer story, but I think it's relevant. I work part-time for a major retailer, and a lady explained to me how her new TV just won't turn on. I asked her all the questions like, did you plug it in? And is the power switch to the plug on? Things like that. She went on to tell me that one of her friends told her that it had to be connected to cable in order to turn on, and she was just going to buy a coax cable to try that. Trying to save her money, I explained this is not the issue, but she goes on and says that her friend is very tech smart and she will just buy one anyway. For some reason, this frustrated me greatly. Everyone suddenly has a tech friend that knows everything when they don't like the answer you give them. Story 20. My aunt. I moved away a year ago to go work for a big IT company. She wants to keep me updated on local news from back home. Her process for giving me news articles from a local news website is mind-boggling. She first prints up a news article from a website to her office copier. She then takes the printout, puts it back on the office copier, scans it to PDF, then emails the PDF to herself, then forwards me the PDF. I tried to explain to her 3 or 4 times how to copy a URL from her web browser, paste it into her email, and send that to me. But she insists that it's too complex and she'll never be able to figure it out or remember it. I suppose it's a good excuse for her to use the copier at least. Story 21. When I was a student, I worked part-time for some of my university's IT groups. I kept doing that when I went into grad school for IS and aced a well-regarded class taught by the director of networking. My boss at the time asked me to go to the campus IT store and pick up a switch. I forgot the exact requirements, but it couldn't be a simple hub. It had to be a switch. So I made my way to the store and saw the networking equipment section high up on a shelf behind the counter. There were 2 models, an expensive one and a cheap one. Both consumer-grade models, so they didn't have very technical terminology on them. I asked the guy behind the counter to get them down for me, examined them, and picked up the expensive one and asked, "Do you know if this is a switch or a router?" He looked very confused. He called one of the supervisors over. The supervisor was one of those self-styled genius types, so I asked him my question and he said something like, "Oh, a switch and a router are the same thing." I'm a girl, so I'm used to guys thinking they know more than I do about computers. I knew what he said wasn't true, and I was almost certain that the router they had was just a switch with a fancier name, thus fulfilling my project purposes. I smirked a bit and said I'd take the expensive one. The supervisor said, "Oh, are you sure? You're not going to put that on the campus network, are you? Because I work for the campus IT group and I know you can't have a router in the network." I'd worked in a subsection of the same group as an undergrad, knew the rules clearly, and again, I just finished a class with the guy who made that policy. A few months later, I rejoined the main IT group, sitting in one of the larger locations, and saw the supervisor from the IT store working with a neighboring group. I was talking to one of his coworkers and he did not recognize me and came over to try to flirt with me. This amused me, so in front of a couple of his coworkers, I recounted the story above, smirked and said, "So, smart one, what is the difference between a switch and a router?" He stuttered a bit, tried to string a few terms together, and I let him ramble for a bit before telling him the correct answer. Story 22. My parents will buy a computer every 3 years or so. It'll be the normal Dell or HP pre-built thing that works fine for web browsing and that sort of thing, but of course it will eventually get outdated and will run really slow. Earlier this year, I offered to build them a computer because the internet is running too slow. Obviously, it wasn't the computer's fault, but the wireless adapter that they were using. At first, I told them that if they bought a 5-pound Ethernet cable, the internet would work perfectly. Anyway, of course, they didn't want to do that and got me to build them a new computer. I built them a fairly average computer for 400 pounds. So I did that for them, and of course, I used a wireless card because they couldn't deal with having an Ethernet cable running around their side of the room. Naturally, the internet was still running as slow as it was before. I can't believe this. 400 pounds for a brand new computer and it's still slow? What's the point? It's because the computer speed has nothing to do with internet speed. Story 23. Apple had a program where you could take a Newton MessagePad 120 that ran Newton OS 1.3 and have it upgraded to Newton OS 2.0 for some amount of money. Might have been $99. Upgrading it involved opening the case and replacing the ROMs. I worked as a Newton programmer at a company that made Newton software for doctors. About 2 years after the program was over, one of our salesmen asked me if we can help someone get the ROMs replaced for Newton 120 running OS 1.3. I told him that the program had ended a long time ago. The MessagePad 2100 was already out by this point. The salesman said Apple had messed up the guy. He bought the MP120 at a garage sale. He was not even the original purchaser. Story 24. I work in IT at my university's library, managing computer updates and resolving technical issues as directed by my supervisor. My duties frequently include assisting users with technical questions, such as how to send an email with an attachment or how to log into Yahoo. Recently, I encountered a situation where I was temporarily away from my computer, which I had been using for important work. During my absence, someone else was directed to use my workstation by a staff member. Upon returning, I found my desk cluttered with my books and personal items, and the new user was working on top of my open documents. I approached the individual and asked, "Excuse me, why are you using this computer? I was working on it." The user responded, "The employee told me to use this computer because it's the only one with a scanner." I then asked if my documents were still open or if any work might have been lost. The user replied defensively, "Don't yell at me, I don't know about your work. I need to get my stuff done." I turned to the staff member who had directed the user and asked, "Why didn't you try the other USB ports in the scanner computer?" The staff member admitted they hadn't tried the other ports. I expressed my frustration, saying, "You should have waited for me to return so I could save my work. If any of my documents are missing, I won't be happy." The staff member responded, "These computers are for people who need scanners." I clarified, "I was using the scanner just 5 minutes ago." I then addressed the user, "Could you please allow me a few minutes to retrieve my files and collect my belongings? I have a lot of work to do." The user responded dismissively, "Whatever." I concluded with the staff member, "This situation should not happen again. Please make sure it doesn't." Story 25. While working at an internet cafe, I had a lady come in asking for help with Skype. I showed her how to access the Skype website and application and then left her to complete the form. A few minutes later, I noticed the form was still blank. When I inquired, she mentioned she didn't have an email address and needed help with that field. I took her to the Gmail website to set up an email account. When I checked back, she had only filled in the first field. It turned out she was typing all the details into the same box. I explained that she needed to click on the next field to continue. She then asked, "How do I click?" It became clear that she didn't know how to use a mouse. Story 26. The time I saw a database in India that was just a giant notepad file. In Pune, India, about a 3-hour drive from Mumbai, my dad and I were handling some phone bill issues from my grandparents. We needed a copy of the previous month's bill due to some discrepancies. We went to the local office, where they told us we'd need to visit the head office about 40 minutes away since all records were stored in a central database. We drove over there in a blazing afternoon sun and waited for 2 hours to speak with someone. When it was finally our turn, the guy asked for our last name and said he needed to access the database. Curious, I leaned over to see this database and was stunned to find it was just a notepad document with around 2,000 phone bills stacked back to back. My dad and I exchanged bewildered looks, channeling our inner Jackie Chan rage faces. It was one of those moments where you can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Story 27. I know I'm a bit late to the party, but I have to share this funny experience. I had a friend who always insisted on closing those pop-ups. You know, the ad banners that look like fake windows. Like, "Congratulations, you're the nth visitor." She kept saying, "No, don't worry, I know what these are. My mom told me you're supposed to X them out." The funny part was I was using Windows XP at the time, and those ad windows didn't look like XP-style windows at all. I tried to explain this to her, but she insisted on clicking the X anyway. Sure enough, she ended up on an ad site and was puzzled. She blamed it on me moving her arm and making her misclick, so she tried again. What's really ironic is that I'm not even a computer expert. I still call the monitor the computer, and my dad is the one who handles most tech issues beyond basic troubleshooting. Yet somehow, I got treated like a smarty-pants just for pointing out such obvious problems. Story 28. My grandma isn't very tech-savvy, but acts like she's a computer genius. Her compact came with some game channel pre-installed, filled with demos. When I was around high school, I asked to check MySpace while at her house. The next day, she told me I wasn't allowed in her computer anymore because I supposedly downloaded a game and infected it with bugs. I explained that the games were pre-installed, but she didn't believe me. My aunt backed her up, saying I must have downloaded the game myself and ignored her warning about not installing anything. They thought my interest in video games meant I was constantly trying to mess with her computer. I was so frustrated, but I just said whatever and never used her computer again. It still annoys me thinking about it, even though it's been 6 to 7 years. Story 29. In late 2001, I was working as a network engineer for a firm with around 1,200 PCs on a LAN and 3,000 on a WAN, all using Citrix thin clients. Microsoft invited our IT team to a conference to showcase Windows 2000. This included our IT manager, who had been promoted from HR due to his people management skills rather than his technical expertise. One night, at around 3 a.m., a junior tech on the help desk called me saying, "The server is down." I was stunned, as our NT server had a remarkable uptime and rarely had issues. It turned out the IT manager, impressed by Microsoft's presentation, decided to upgrade the server himself. We had the Windows 2000 Pro disk but planned to upgrade carefully with trials and tests. Instead, he inserted the disk into the server, expecting it to transfer all users and settings automatically. He ended up wiping the server, causing a 2-day outage and delaying payroll. On a lighter note, a friend of my mom asked me to help with her internet issues. It turned out Internet Explorer was simply opening in a small window instead of maximized. Fixing that impressed her so much that she gave me her old computer as a thank you. My mom, who previously didn't know how to open a browser, managed to download an Ubuntu ISO, burn a CD, and install it after I suggested it for her simple needs like internet and YouTube. She's been happily using it ever since. During the same period as a network admin, I encountered some memorable issues such as an employee stored all his important emails in his Outlook deleted items folder. A user demanded a left-handed mouse, even after I configured her existing mouse for left-handed use. An IT manager insisted on an admin account with the password 123 to make it easier for him to reset his password. This happened almost weekly. I once found bad content in the CEO's son's computer. Story 30. My mother recently acquired a new printer and my brother attempted to set it up. Unfortunately, he encountered some difficulties and my mother reached out to me for assistance. She requested that I communicate with my brother to figure out the issue. I began by asking my brother to describe how the printer was connected. He informed me that it was plugged into the wall, indicating that it had power, but then inquired about the type of connection it used, such as USB. My brother seemed unsure about the technical details, so I attempted to guide him by asking about the shape of the plug. He described it as square, which initially confused me as that description could fit either end of a USB cable. After some clarification, it became apparent that he was referring to the end that connects to the printer. I then instructed him to connect the other end to the computer. My brother was unfamiliar with the computer's USB ports, mistaking them for other types of connections. After some guidance, he managed to locate the correct port and connect the printer. However, the computer still could not detect the printer. I then walked him through the process of rebooting both the Mac and the printer, but the issue persisted. Eventually, I requested to speak with my mother to further troubleshoot the problem. It was discovered that the older Mac Mini had limited USB ports, both of which were already in use, one by the monitor and the other by the speakers. My brother had initially attempted to insert the USB cable into the FireWire slot, which was an incorrect approach. He then connected the USB cable to the only available USB port he could find, which was on the monitor, presumably where the speaker should have been connected. My brother seemed to believe that since the monitor was connected to the computer, any peripheral connected to the monitor would automatically communicate with the computer, especially since it was a USB connection. Story 31. My boss calls everything from our website to our printers database. We do in fact have a document database which we use, so every time she has an issue I have no idea what she's talking about. I can't connect to the database. He meant it could not print. The database crashed. We're hacked. He meant the computer is unplugged. Story 32. Not really a computer problem, but just as enraging. I used to do internal system support for Circuit City. If it unplugged in and wasn't merchandise, I fixed it. I got an emergency call one afternoon for a store 200 miles or 3.5 hours away. Their DirecTV display was down and the district manager was insisting someone come fix it ASAP. So I drop what I'm doing, drive myself 200 miles to the store, only to find that the 2 power strips at the bottom of the display that everything was powered from were plugged into each other instead of an actual working outlet. I was so mad. Story 33. My mom shouted at me the other day because her camera wasn't connecting to the computer. I spent some time trying to help, at which point it became all my fault, but couldn't find out why I wasn't recognizing it. I then decided to check the cable. Apparently the USB cables can fit into the top part of the Ethernet ports. Who knew? Story 34. There are some people in my company that refer to everything as the server. Is the server down? She meant her screen resolution set to 800 by 600. Is the server up? She has somehow raised her hard drive. Could you put it in the server? Why isn't the file magically appearing on my desktop? Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.